Hi, welcome to Cross Country Classics Project Nova. This is episode 1, and we'll be looking at the tear down and ripping out of the motor in this episode. To start off, this Chevy Nova began with a 194 inline 6. This is the stock motor on the Chevy Nova. It's got a single barrel carburetor, and it will be replaced with a Buick V6. It is a 3.8 liter. It makes about 120 horsepower stock, and that is the same horsepower that the 198 inline 6 makes stock. And incidentally, these motors came from Buick Skylarks in the late 70s, which is quite funny because the Skylark is an X-body in the 70s and the Nova was the original X-body. It's going to get hooked up to a TKO 5-speed transmission, which I got for my LS that is going to be going into the car later, but I figured I wanted to get everything together and have a driving car before I built the LS, because being real, it's more about driving than it is anything else. And to start the teardown, I drained all the fluids out, so here I am opening up the radiator so we could drain out all the fluid. And this radiator, actually the whole cooling system holds a lot. It's about 10 or 12 quarts, I can't remember. But I also, taking into account, this is including the heater core, so I was draining all that out too. Here, I moved to getting the oil out of the oil pan because I was waiting on the cooling system to completely drain out of the radiator. And this motor had problems to begin with. It had a head gasket issue where it leaked through the head gasket, oil leaked out, and every time you drove it, oil would leak out and drip down the side of the motor. So I was not surprised when I pulled the oil plug that only about 1.5 quarts of oil came out, and I know there is a lot of damage, and we'll see that in the next episode. These motors, they're good, they're reliable, but they're not really worth the time to repair if a swap is going to be done anyways. And then moving from there, I began pulling the carburetor and the intake and exhaust manifold. On inline 6s, Chevy inline 6s, the intake and the exhaust manifold are one piece. And that is because of the reverse cross-flow head. I'm sorry, the reverse flow head. And it makes it one piece. But that does also mean that the intake air gets very hot because the intake ports are right next to the exhaust ports. These motors, they breathe terribly. You know, you could do a whole bunch to make them breathe better, but it's not really worth the time and effort. You could build them up to make a whole bunch of horsepower, but you could also switch in a 250 inline 6 if you wanted more horsepower. They're the exact same size. But here I'm talking about the intake ports and how they have a giant head bolt that runs through the middle and disrupts all the airflow for the intake charge, and how it makes this motor really suffer in terms of making horsepower. That and the fact that it has a single barrel carburetor to feed 6 cylinders in a line. And when we look at the video of me tearing apart the motor, we're going to see how the motor kind of suffered from that when we look at the head once I get it pulled off in the next episode. Other than that, it was an easy pull. I was able to pull the transmission cross member, and what I did is I lowered the transmission cross member, and it allowed the engine to lean back with the transmission on it, and that allowed me to reach the bell housing bolts, and I undid those. And once that was done, I was able to undo the flex plate from the torque converter, and that really saved me. That kept me from spilling ATF everywhere, because when you disconnect an automatic transmission from the motor, if the torque converter comes with the motor, it'll spill the ATF that's in it. And I just thought ahead and did that because I just didn't feel like cleaning up ATF. But this motor came out so easy. You just hooked it up to the cherry picker, and the cherry picker would haul it away. We pulled the hood off so the cherry picker would clear, and I actually, in this case, I used a head bolt, and I actually used a rocker stud to hook up the load leveler, so I was able to pull the motor out. Man, this motor's heavy. It's like 450 pounds, and on a two-ton engine lift, it shakes it around a lot. The Buick Oddfire, it's not much better. It's about the same weight. It's just more compact. Other than that, we'll be looking into the teardown of the motor next week, and hopefully in future episodes we'll look at my teardown of the old suspension and the installation of the Church Boy suspension. Thanks for watching, and tune in next week.